Seems like it's 3:32 I have on my clock, so we'll call this meeting to order. Let's see. I'm sorry, I'm new to this, so I'm going to be taking over as chair today. So I'm reading off the paper. We'll take roll call. So when I read your name, let me know if you're here. Anderson?
Here.
Einen Lynch?
Here.
Frazier?
Here.
Gade here. Grimm? Harrelson? Murray?
Here.
Shetty?
Here.
Silman?
Here.
Smith?
Here.
And Sturdivant is out. Okay, great. And then next, we'll do approval of the May 6, 2024 minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
I move to approve the last minutes.
Great.
Shetty second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, wonderful. Public comment of items not on the agenda. Do we have any members of the public present? Any on Zoom? Is that? No. Okay. Well, I will skip reading that. Let's see, announcements. So we have action items from last meeting.
Yes, so we
Yeah.
had 2 action items that came up in the last meeting. The first is that staff will relay commissioners' thoughts on the green jobs to the partners working on the regional CPRG Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. Just to thank you again for the excellent discussion and the thoughtful comments. We are passing them along to the process, and we'll be mindful of things that were discussed in this meeting as we work on that plan. And then the second item was a request to add a discussion of suggestions of frequency of metrics reporting and potential uses to a future meeting. And you'll see we have put that on the agenda for today. And then in terms of upcoming events, this one isn't happening in July or June. It'll be next month, but we just wanted to put it on the radar in case anyone present would like to participate in it and sign up for the training. We are bringing in a representative from the National Weather Service and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's the same person wearing 2 hats, to conduct a training for the COCO-RAS, which is a citizen science data collection initiative that looks at precipitation. And I never quite get the acronym right, but I think it's Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow, right? Oh, I got it. Terrible acronym, great project. But we're going to be hosting that training at the Senior Center, and we'll be offering the equipment that's needed to keep track of that data at a discount for anyone who participates. So we're very excited about it. And it grows out of the initiative last summer looking at heat islands. One of our big takeaways from that was that there's just a clear interest in assisting with these kind of data needs. When we talked with the National Weather Service about ways we could continue to be involved, and NOAA, this was something that floated to the top as data that's always very valuable to them because it's very localized. So if anybody would like to participate, feel free to talk with Megan after the meeting, and she can help get you signed up or send you the link or send you more information. And then we wanted to pause here if anybody has any upcoming events in the community that they'd like to share. All right.
Seeing none there, we'll move on to item 6 of new business, the fleet transition plan.
Great. And I see that both Sam and Sarah have joined us. For those of you, hopefully you had a chance to look at the staff memo that was included in the agenda packet. We are nearing the completion of the fleet transition plan study that we've been working on across departments in the city. And we have invited representatives of ICF here to provide their findings. Hopefully you were able to make heads or tails of the memo, even if you couldn't quite get through the slides, which will be presented here today. The big takeaway is, as you know, we have an EV first policy in the city that when vehicles go up to retire, we have to look and see if there is an EV equivalent that's possible and then make a determination whether or not it's viable to adopt at this time. So one of the things that ICF has been doing, and this is really the heart of the project, is saying if we embrace that strategy fully, how long would it take us just using that practice to fully electrify our fleet? So what they did was look at when vehicles are coming up for replacement, is there an existing equivalent now? If it was yes, they marked it down. If it was no, then it gets put out for the next round of replacement, at which point we would look at it again. And they determined how long it would take us, but even more importantly, what is the kind of infrastructure build out we need to support that kind of strategy. So with that overview, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Kay, who you can all see on the screen, and she's going to take us through some of the key findings.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll just hop on here to introduce us really quickly while I have my camera on. So hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Kay. I'm a clean transportation manager at ICF and working with Sarah and Danny over at the city for the fleet analysis and transition plan. Also wanted to introduce my colleague, Sam Fornazzeri, who's the project manager for the fleet transition plan. So both of us have been teaming up for this particular project. If you hear Sam's voice over the course of this presentation or during the Q&A presentation, don't be alarmed. He may be jumping in to answer any lingering questions. Sam, did you want to offer a quick introduction too?
Sure. Sam Fornazzeri, Senior Director of Clean Transportation Energy at ICF. Glad to be here with you guys. We had the pleasure working with your staff and with the City of Iowa City, especially Sarah and Danny over the past year to build this. Plan, which is hopefully going to serve as a good roadmap for how the city is going to transition away from fossil fuels to electric vehicles and cleaner energy.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. I'm going to turn off my video while I share screen just to avoid any sort of buffering situation. Just want to make sure that, Sarah, you can see that in the room?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Right, perfect. So just wanted to start with a quick agenda of what we'll be walking everybody through today. We'll start with, from a high level, some of the plan objectives, and then dive into the existing fleet composition, and then our process of analyzing the fleet and infrastructure needs. And then also looking at what some of the cost elements are associated with both the vehicle and the infrastructure piece. And then some considerations looking forward for implementation. But with that, I will start with some of the high-level objectives of the plan. So I think first and foremost, we were looking at the existing fleet and determining what a cost-effective transition would look like, focusing on zero-emission technologies, I think all electric technologies in particular, and then developing a sustainable infrastructure plan from some of those vehicle assumptions to help Iowa City prepare for that electrified future. And then also to evaluate any of the cost elements associated with that transition to help the city prepare financially for that. And with that, looking at some of the funding sources that could help support that financial transition. And then also looking at implementation as move into the implementation phase. So wanted to also emphasize that this plan is in alignment with the city's emission reduction goals. I know that recent studies have shown that transportation is the second largest contributor to citywide emissions. And so the look at the municipal fleet for ways to decarbonize, I think, is a good way to support as the city looks to reduce the transportation slice of that emissions pie. So I wanted to also keep that in mind. We'll circle back to that a little bit later in the presentation too. But wanted to start from our baseline. So you can see here the city's fleet composition, which is made up of 399 total vehicles, 287 which are on-road vehicles, and 112 which are non-road vehicles. You can see from this pie chart that of the on-road vehicles, the largest segments are light-duty pickups, sedans, and SUVs. So when we reach sort of the vehicle recommendations, if those bars on the chart are the largest, that's sort of where we're pulling from. And so we leveraged the fleet assessment model to build off of the city's fleet data. We used a data intake form to look at the city's fleet characteristics. And where there wasn't data, we used our past experience and best practices to help fill in those gaps so that we could analyze the fleet as a whole to determine whether there are electric vehicles that would meet the city's needs for each existing vehicle. And so through that process, ICF holds an EV model library of over 500 vehicle models and matched those up against the fleet's needs and current characteristics to understand whether there are replacement models that we would recommend for this fleet in particular. And you can see all of the elements that go into that decision. And the EV models were selected based on things like nominal battery capacity and range, as well as their cost effectiveness compared to their business as usual equivalent. And so one of the outputs for the fleet assessment model were vehicle recommendations as seen through a replacement schedule and categorized by vehicle type and department. In the next slide, you can see that there are different EV model recommendations based on what the fleet would use them for. So you can see the most recommended model is a Chevy Silverado EV, and that's a light duty pickup in line with that slice of light duty pickups that make up the fleet. And it's worth mentioning that ICF and Sarah and Danny from the city met with fleet managers from 5 different departments to ensure that these replacement recommendations would meet their departmental specific needs. Moving on to the non-road vehicle side, we also evaluated this piece separately just because there are different needs associated with non-road. Also, there's a little bit less data on non-road specific replacements. But of that 112 total non-road vehicle and equipment types, that included 24 tractors, 19 ATVs or UTVs, 13 mowers, 12 forklifts, 9 backhoes, 5 floor scrubbers, and there are also 30 vehicles that are categorized as other. So that other category encompasses vehicles where there's no current electric alternative. So we sort of put that in a separate bucket to not be considered for this particular analysis. You can see that there are certain categories in this non-road segment that present a more compelling case for electrification that may be better lower hanging fruit. As this piece transitions, you can see specifically ATVs and UTVs along with mowers and scrubbers show lower barriers with more readily available electric models that would offer a more cost-effective transition to an electric alternative. But moving into the infrastructure assessment, the infrastructure assessment is what we devoted a little more, what we would emphasize more strongly for the city, as there are longer planning timelines associated with getting the necessary infrastructure in place to be ready to charge an EV once it arrives. So for this piece of the assessment, we built off of the outputs that the vehicle recommendations gave us to determine what energy demand would look like for the EVs that we estimated for the city. And from that, determined the number of charging stations by type across specific facilities where those vehicles are currently located or expected to be located. And then from that, looked at the grid or facility level upgrades that would be associated with those charging infrastructure, and then also the cost and the implementation schedule for the infrastructure specifically. So to dive in a little bit deeper, our approach to the infrastructure assessment looked at two different scenarios for charging. The first one is this 1-to-1 vehicle to charging port ratio. And this is where we would have a dedicated charging port for each vehicle. And then for the multiple vehicle to charging port ratio, it would mean that multiple EVs would share access to a charging port. And there are different considerations that go with this. It depends. We spoke with the same fleet managers that we talked with for the along the vehicle recommendations to ensure that we understood what their parking realities looked like. And so we created a hybrid scenario specifically for the city, depending on what departments came back to us with, what their needs were, whether they really required one port for each, or if they valued the cost effectiveness or the space savings associated with a multiple vehicle to charging port ratio. So the plan itself created this schedule that you can see in the upper left corner. And this categorizes the charging infrastructure by facility across the implementation schedule. And the schedule is in alignment with the vehicle retirement schedule. So if you see the vehicle retirement schedule and the charging infrastructure plan, you should see that they should closely align. With all of the analysis, we determined that the city would require around 146 chargers to meet the vehicle recommendations in the fleet vehicle plan. And that would be made up of 76 DC fast chargers and 70 level 2 chargers. In total, that would equate to around 8,000 kilowatts of additional load. And when we estimated how much that charging infrastructure would cost and the associated installation, that pencils out to around 6.78 million. Another step that we took to look at this was the infrastructure upgrade needs. And these needs can be separated into two buckets. One is the facility side and the utility side costs. This slide in particular looks at, for each facility, whether there is enough electrical capacity currently to meet the additional load of the EVs that would be on site for each of these facilities. And so right now there are 20 facilities listed. Around half of those facilities showed, when we compared the existing load plus the additional load, along with utility information on the capacity that serves each of these sites, around half of the facilities would require additional infrastructure to meet those charging needs. And so we've highlighted that for the city here on where to start those discussions with your utility to make sure that we are prepared once the city is ready to install charging infrastructure and purchase electric vehicles. This slide also shows the cost breakdown for each facility and the associated charging infrastructure. This slide shows both the facility side and the utility side upgrades that would be needed and broken out by each of those components. So in total, we've estimated that those infrastructure upgrades could cost 1.76 million. Do want to offer a strong caveat that these are very general assumptions. It does require utility conversations and conversations with each facility manager to see what these costs would actually pencil out to. But these right now are based on some of the best practices that we have. So that brings us to the total cost of ownership. We wanted to compare what the existing cost of the fleet is versus what their EV replacements would look like. And so you can see that full broken down cost on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side is the more simplified version that shows that the significant savings associated with transitioning to electric vehicles really come from operations and maintenance savings. However, that's sort of balanced with the increase in capital costs for both the vehicle and EV chargers, which leads to an increase in the total cost of ownership of $4 million. Also want to note that these numbers are calculated in net present value, just to show what these costs would be like in today's dollars. But with that, I know that 5 million in the scheme of things may or may not be a big or not so big commitment of an increase, but also wanted to note that there are a wide range of incentive programs that are available to the city that can help support or alleviate the financial cost of the transition. So just wanted to list a few on this slide to show that there's a broad range of programs that the city can partner with that can offer up to millions for specific projects. Some are specifically for vehicles, some cover both vehicles and chargers, some are for specific types of fleet. I know that the city has previously partnered with EPA's low or no emission bus grant program. So I know that there's already experts within the city that have capitalized on some of these opportunities. But to show an example, we've broken down some of the costs on this slide. You can see kind of in this stepwise graph, what makes up that total cost of ownership number. And then you can see in those last two bars what the EV total cost of ownership would look like with or without incentives. I want to note that the incentives that we've calculated in this graph are only for federal tax credits. So if the city did not apply to any grant programs, there would and only noted the EV or only claimed EV tax credits at the end of the year, there would still be 3.5 million in savings that the city could see. I just wanted to know that this can obviously be increased depending on how much the city wants to apply for. But just for federal tax credits, there's that 3.5 million that the city can take advantage of. One thing that's missing from the cost calculation is the environmental benefit of the transition. So wanted to note that adopting EVs coupled with the state of Iowa's grid decarbonization efforts means that the transition could result in reducing the city's GHG emissions by over 53,000 metric tons, and equivalent to removing 11.5 thousand passenger vehicles or planting 875,000 trees. Also want to note that there are other air quality benefits that are involved with moving to a zero emission tailpipe technology. But one of the more notable ones is the reduction in NOx emissions. So we estimate that over 100,000 pounds of NOx emissions would be prevented by this transition. So some good tidbits to support this committee's efforts for this fleet transition plan in particular. However, we do want to recognize that there are well-known barriers to transitioning to EV technologies. You can see a handful of them listed here. Some of the notable ones are higher upfront costs and limited availability to EV models today. I know that there are lots of conversations around range anxiety with existing models, and also the lack of workforce training. And do want to note that as the market evolves, we anticipate technological breakthroughs in both battery technologies and manufacturing that will hopefully lead to an expanded market with more robust support networks. But these are also things that we would take into consideration as the city moves into the implementation phase. There are emerging best practices for some of these barriers that the plan will touch on, but just want to note that the market is continuing to evolve, and hopefully as the city implements this plan over the next decade plus, that there will hopefully be solutions that emerge more clearly in the interim. So with that, wanted to offer some considerations for implementation and then open it up for questions. But I think first off, the city can develop an EV implementation plan that takes into account more of the realities of the fleet and how the fleet would like to evolve. Part of that is forming an EV fleet transition team. We've seen in a lot of our work that regular engagement of fleet managers and of stakeholders and external partners is critical to ensuring that the transition is smart and efficient. Part of that is engaging your local utilities early and often. I think that conversation has already started with this plan, but I think strengthening those relationships and keeping in regular contact can do a lot to ensure that we aren't playing catch up at a later date. Part of the implementation plan will also include having a funding strategy in place. And I think this plan offers a good start in terms of what the city can pull from and some of those funding, the grant applications to help supplement budgetary realities. And part of that is also starting small, identifying some early pilots to start with and identify lessons learned, best practices for the city before expanding it to the broader fleet. But with that, that is an extremely high-level overview of what Sarah, Danny, Sam, and myself have been up to over the course of the last year. But wanted to maybe start with Sam, if there are any points that you wanted to further hammer home, or happy to open it up for questions.
No, I think you did cover everything pretty well, Sarah. Yeah, just to summarize and wrap up, really. Again, I mean, this is a high-level planning effort. I mean, started as really a study to really understand the level of efforts and and cost implications of such transition and how such transition can be done. I mean, as I noted earlier, as we opened up this presentation, we're really looking at this as a roadmap. The technology is evolving really rapidly. I mean, every year there are new models coming in. There are some models that are, going off the market. So it's very important to, keep track of how the market is changing. But this kind of planning efforts really help cities across the country to get prepared for this wave of EVs, and most importantly, having the infrastructure needed to support, powering these vehicles. I mean, we all talk about vehicles all the time, but to me, the most important thing, I think, in my opinion, and one of the biggest barriers in electrification is going to be the infrastructure. So this kind of planning really helps to illuminate and shed lights on the level of infrastructure deployment needs to be done across the cities, facilities, and this infrastructure is not just the chargers themselves, but also the electrical infrastructure, as well as the coordination with all the utilities that needs to go through, as well as looking into different financing models that could be deployed by the city to pay for this transition. So with that, would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sam and Sarah. I think we're all taking it in a bit, but I'm sure we're going to have a question here in a second.
I have a question. So I guess I'm just curious about the compatibility of like different chargers. This is something I've heard about, but I haven't really dove into too much. But to what extent is that an issue that was covered in this study, and is that like a potential barrier to adopting like an EV fleet across the entire city? Like if there's different departments using different vehicles from different vendors that have different chargers that aren't compatible with each other, if that makes sense.
Right. So I will say that compatibility is not something that we've explicitly mentioned in the plan. There are the models that we have included in the plan do not have those restrictions. And if the city chooses to go with the model that would have those restrictions, there are adapters on the market that are very low cost. That would be an easy solution for the city if they wanted to buy a handful of adapters for those vehicles, particularly, kind of just have them in the back of the trunk to whip out whenever they needed to charge. So there are those solutions. Should the city choose to go with a model that might not have maybe part of a closed network.
And just to put a little bit more background, right now in the market, there are multiple different connectors. But the most common one is the NACS, the North America Charging Standards, which is offered by Tesla, or was originally offered by Tesla. And then on the other vehicles, the non-Tesla vehicles, they have for the level 2 chargers, which is the slower chargers, they use a connector called J1776, which are the regular level 2 ports that you can see if you go and try to charge your electric vehicles at a charging stations like a charge point. Or on the DC fast chargers, that it's called CCS, Combined Charging Standard, which they have the 2 big pins on the top of it, and then similar to J1776 at the bottom of it. So as Sarah mentioned, if there are level 2 chargers or CCS chargers like J1776 or CCS chargers recommending for most of the vehicles you have, basically any sort of like charging stations could be used. Even if you tried to put some Tesla chargers there, you can still use some adapters to make your Tesla charger to be compatible with your vehicles that do not have a NACS type of connector or port in them. So the issue, that standardizations of connectors is important, and it's very important as you guys are rolling out your chargers, to make sure your chargers are all compatible with the vehicles. I mean, then that is something that one of the points Sarah made in the implementation strategy, that EV implementation strategy is really getting into the nitty-gritty details of those things, of making sure as you're entering into the procurement, as you're speccing out your chargers and what you need out of your chargers, aside from the power level and type, you consider all of that compatibility with the vehicles that you plan to purchase.
Cool, thank you.
I do have a question. This is Gade. So as you had mentioned, models are always changing, and in the future there will be a lot more models. Are you recommending more of a kind of wait until the market changes a little bit and there's more availability, or what would it look like for implementation now? I guess with newer models and.
No, we're not recommending any wait. I mean, especially in the light. So there are special categories of vehicles that there's more, I will call it EV scarcity than the others. Like in the light duty vehicles, there are so many models and make and models today available that can meet most of the ranges, if not all of the type of operations that the city has. So definitely no need to wait, I mean, until the market evolve in the light duty space. On the heavy duty space, the same thing. We're seeing a lot more models available today, I mean, with different ranges. However, the cost is pretty high. So, I mean, I always make this example of like Class 8 tractor. I mean, you can buy a diesel one for $150K, and EV one is $450K. It's a threefold increase in the cost of the vehicle. So it's always a big barrier in terms of the cost, but the model availability is there. Where the model scarcity exists is mainly in the medium duty pickup and medium duty vocational sides. So for example, one of the slides that Sarah was showing, it had two models there called ZEV-X models. I mean, as we were doing this study, those were the only two models that were able to transition the F350s and F450s to. Unfortunately, a month or two ago, ZEV-X discontinued those two models. So those two models are not available. And I was at the ACT Expo, like one of the biggest conferences that they showcased all of these commercial vehicles last week. And unfortunately, I didn't see any manufacturers building any medium duty pickup EVs today. There are some coming down the road, but today, unfortunately, they're not available. We decided to keep those ZEV-X in the planning because our goal out of this planning, as I said, was not just the vehicles. It was really to figure out, once those medium duty pickups, all the other vehicles that right now may not exist becomes available, you guys to be ready to have the charging infrastructure in place to be able to purchase those vehicles and power them, because it takes time to build those charging infrastructure. So just to summarize and give you a short version of that answer, it depends on which sectors of the vehicles you're looking for. Some sectors are ready to go. Some sectors, again, you probably could wait a little bit until the market is mature enough, and then that you can start like tapping into those. And again, as Sarah mentioned in this slide, pilot programs are great. Try with one or two, see how it works, and then scale.
This is Shetty. I have a question about capacity. I believe one of the slides showed that there were several areas around Iowa City, units that don't actually have the grid capacity for the infrastructure. Could you talk a little bit more about what kinds of conversations need to happen with utilities, or if you've worked with other cities that have done the work to grow capacity?
Sure. I think it starts with verifying some of these numbers with the utilities. Sometimes utilities will have plans in place to update their infrastructure without talking to their customers, and sometimes it's just part of their projected growth. So I think understanding the utilities plans for the next 5-10 years is the place to start. And then I think talking with the utility on some of the assumptions that are listed in this plan and showing them sort of the map of where facilities are, if they're moving, where they will be, and planning for that expected load. Also, want to caveat that this is only current load and the expected load coming from EV charging. If the city plans to expand, that's another element to think about if there are any renovations in place for a facility. That would be something that you would have to talk to your utility anyways to see if that expansion or if the energy demanded from that expansion is still within capacity. So this is another piece of planning that I think the city would incorporate into their utility conversations. I believe this conversation is already ongoing for the city of Iowa City, where conversations with partners on certain sites, the utility is helping them determine what specific infrastructure is required. So I think that it's, as we said before, it's kind of delving into the nitty gritty on whether it's a transformer that's required or how big that transformer would be, and if the utility has estimated costs for those type of upgrades. But Sam, anything I missed?
No, I think you covered it all. And I would just add that utilities love to hear from you guys about those expected load. That is something they strive for, to get those information from their customers. So the sooner you provide those information to them, even if it's just a plan. I mean, and we all know plans do not get executed, exactly as they're planned. So early on, if you're expecting like, well, over the next 5 years, I probably needed a megawatt of additional capacity in this, in this facility, and not a 2 megawatt in this facility, communicate those early on with your utilities, because they would like to bake those, load projections into their plans, which, will help you, not only help you guys to get those electrical infrastructure needed in time for putting the chargers into place, but also help them to make sure that they can plan their distribution system in a way that can support that. So, and those conversations sometimes are in the form of like filling out an application for new energization project, or it could be something like as simple as like, yeah, let's have a meeting and discuss our project, and then they will guide you through the process that you need to go through. Whether it's a pre-application, whether it's, a form you need to fill out, whether they need to do some site visits, for them to be able to support you with that. But I will definitely recommend working with a lot of utilities as well as municipalities at the same time. I definitely recommend you guys to start that conversation early on with the number of utilities that you guys have. And you guys have really good utilities because we work across the country. Your utilities were the ones that were very cooperative in this study, providing us with all these valuable information.
Sam, you just made our utility rep on the commission smile.
Thank you.
Oh, great. I didn't know that. That was really unplanned.
I'll just add to that, call out something that was in the staff memo that you saw included. We do enjoy a really great relationship with the utility, and one of the things that really became clear through the course of this study was that we're in regular communication with the utility about our plans and what the needs are, but we also need to be communicating with other entities that might be drawing power off of the same substation, specifically CAN Bus, Brenda, which is why I'm so glad you brought up this question, and also the county. Because if we aren't coordinating our efforts, there's some risk that some of us will pay for upgrades to the infrastructure that will benefit the other entities. So coordinating between those is going to be very key going forward.
Thank you.
This is John Fraser. I really commend you on this study. This is, as you said, a very high-level overview. I think of a simple expression, build it and they will come. They will come when they know when the break even is and how long that break-even period is. And I'm not sure I saw any break-even numbers. I think they're very hard to establish because you've got so many different users with different requirements, a very diverse group of users. And I guess the most important thing I saw at the end, and maybe I'm being too simple, but establishing pilot programs, I think that's the key to this whole thing. Because you also said, do we wait for the market to develop? I've heard we'll wait till the market develops. I heard that about 5 times. And I agree with that. And we can't afford to wait till the market develops if we're going to lead. The only way we're going to lead is to incentivize in pilot programs so we can establish a try it, you'll like it type situation and keep promoting it and growing it. It scares me a little to wait until somebody else grows it because everyone else is going to wait for someone else to grow it. Everyone else is going to wait till the market develops. And I don't have the answer to that. And it's our biggest challenge, I think. So pilot programs is what it's all about, in my opinion. Little baby steps, tiny bites, and certain small demographic groups out of that large group of people that you outlined so artfully, just to see if we can successfully play in a small sandbox before we dive into the big one, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. And I think to Sam's earlier point, the light duty market, I think some would argue that that market is here, that we don't need to be waiting for that market to further develop. It will further develop, but it is fairly robust. And that there are good success stories for that segment in particular, for other segments as well. That implementation, we really just wanted to focus in more on the tailoring that needs to happen for Iowa City's specific needs. I think that was what was so crucial about us meeting with all of the different departmental fleet managers, is that every department in Iowa City's fleet has much more specific needs than Sam and I are able to know about, and that changes for every city. And so I think that keeping that conversation ongoing is kind of the crucial piece of the implementation plan, to make sure that all of these best practices that we have and that we're including in the plan, that trues up with what the city gets to see on the ground.
John Fraser, one
And
more
you're
comment. Probably a bad example, but I switched from a model of car to the same model, but a hybrid, so I'm getting 44 miles per gallon as opposed to 17. I know in my heart, to be a solid citizen and to care about the world, I need to switch to all electric. And my selfishness prevents me from doing that because my lifestyle says, you know, I need to go further than, name it, 125 miles or 200 miles, whatever it is, and recharge, and the time that I would lose, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I haven't been sold. So what somebody needs to do with a pilot program is to show me through some incentives what can happen if I go all electric and go in totally instead of halfway in. And I'm further in than a lot of people, but I'm not going any deeper until somebody will incentivize me a little bit so I will become a true believer in all electric versus hybrid. But that's just me, but I don't think I'm that unique. Among all our potential demographics and all our users and all the needs and all the requirements, everyone's got their story about why this won't work for me. And that's why the pilot programs and the incentive programs are so important.
Exactly, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, pilot programs is not only for technology demonstration, but it's really, to me, it has been a crucial step for getting that buy-in. Even just within the city and within among the city fleets. I mean, I had so many municipalities that I helped with. I mean, that have every single excuse of not buying EVs. The first EV they bought, they loved it, and they were like, "Okay, we're all in. We want to we want to scale and go from this one to like 100. So it's really important to test it out, because until you test it out, all those like I mean, being afraid of transition, because it's, I mean, to be honest, I mean, it's a scary transition. I mean, it's an unknown technology for a lot of folks. So doing that pilot in a small scale and then spreading the lessons learned around it, I think that's really critical for scaling up and doing it across the city.
Well, it looks like you've answered all the questions. Do we have any others? No? All right. Thank you so much, Sam and Sarah, for carving out time to meet with our commission today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course, pleasure to be here. Thanks, everybody.
And keep up the good work. This is great stuff. I mean, this is way cool. So don't let anybody discourage you, please.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Sarah, do we want a discussion?
Yeah, if we want to just pause for a moment in case there's any discussion you wanted to have not in front of the consultants who are working on that project, we want to make that space. And if you feel like you've had your questions answered and there's not much less to, or more to discuss, we can of course move on from there.
Well, are there other cities that like have done this sort of a thing, and have we talked to them about what the difficulties are that come around with it?
Yeah, we are a bit on, depending on who you talk to in city staff, we're on the cutting edge. We have one engineer who participated in the process who would say we are on the bleeding edge of this effort. But there are other cities that are doing this work, and that was actually part of our interest in engaging ICF to help with the effort, because they work with so many different cities on this, and we're able to share lessons learned from those cities and can help put us in conversation with them as well. They also work on the federal fleet for a number of federal departments, and are very involved in discussions about like the development of incentive programs. So it really helped give us an eagle-eye view of not just what exists and is available to us, what have other cities used, but also what might be coming down the pike that we can be thinking about. And I will say, myself, looking at the study, one of the things I really appreciated about their financial projections, and they sort of mentioned it, but I don't know if it quite came through, is that when they looked at the incentives, they gave us a package of incentives, like here's everything you could go after to support this transition. But when they did their financial analysis, they only included the ones that are non-competitive, which means we will get them so long as we file the paperwork. So it's a very conservative estimate of, maybe very is not right the word, but it's a conservative estimate of what we could realistically get back through the incentive programs and how that would factor into the costs of this. What gets lost a little in that analysis, of course, is it's easy to think like, oh, well, you're going to budget, the same amount of dollars year over year for 15 years, and then you'll be there. And of course, it'll be a bit more uneven than that, right? Because we'll have a very big investment we'll have to make ahead of the transit facility that's coming forward. And then we probably won't be investing quite as heavily for a few years after that, and then there'll be another lift when we move another facility out there. So it'll be a little uneven, but what this does is really give us an opportunity to think ahead to those costs, to be talking to other entities so that we are all doing it in collaboration with one another, and to make those pilots successful. Where this project really originated was, as you know, we have been experimenting with adding vehicles to our fleet, and we're very quickly running into capacity issues at facilities where we either had to put in upgrades, or just as an example, we've been working with the police department about adding electric vehicles, and we quickly realized we can add 2 if we're very deliberate in the time of day they're charged before we have to really invest heavily in that facility to add any more. And so what this does is give us a chance to really get the infrastructure in place so that when those vehicles come up for retirement, we can buy the EV and, retire the ICE vehicle instead of saying, oh gosh, we don't actually have the infrastructure in place. Let's wait another 8 years before this opportunity comes up again. All very valuable.
I guess, too, John was kind of alluding to the fact, like, distance is what he was talking about, too, but I was thinking, too, about workflow, and, like, we currently do have a bus system in place, but, like, my son has this little lawn mowing business, and he's got 3 batteries, and okay, I'm gonna drive over here, I'm gonna charge it here, and then that way when I'm mowing these 2 lawns, then when I come here, then I can use that battery, and I can, like, he has to be really organized and thoughtful and planful about that, and so I just was curious, like, how might impact workflow on a daily basis, but we already have, like, our bus, like program in place, so we must have coped with daily workflow. I don't know.
Yeah, to some degree, and it'll be different for every department. I will say, just as a human participating in this, it has been so fascinating as a lens into the different ways each different department in the city operates, right? So one of the workflow issues that came up early on, we were talking to our public works staff about emergency snow plowing and what that would look like for electrification, and the consultants had proposed charging systems that could let us bring our vehicles back and get them recharged in less than 2 hours and back out on the road for really big batteries. And we were like, that's really impressive. And then the public works staff were like, that is not workable for us, right? Because in an emergency snow situation, they run those plows 24 hours a day. And there are many vehicles actually that go out and have an extra tank of gas with them so that when they run out of gas, they don't even have to return to Public Works or a gas station to regas. They refuel on the fly and keep going. And so that led to some very interesting discussions. I mean, we allude to it a bit in the memo about places where operations, either we will have to adjust operations, we'll have to say, in an emergency situation, it may take 2 hours longer to get all the roads plowed because we're just going to need to return the vehicles to charge them. Or we're going to need to buy extra vehicles so that when one comes back to charge, we can send another out and continue to plow 24 hours a day. And the cost of that, I should be very clear, is not incorporated into this study. This study purely looks at current city policy and retirement schedule, replacing vehicles on a 1-to-1 ratio. But being able to identify that as a potential pinch point and something we need to be thinking ahead about, I think will be very valuable as we look ahead to that transition. I know I said there were going to be 2 things I was going to say in response to that, and I forgot the other one, so hopefully it'll come back to me.
Well, what you're talking about kind of gets at something I've been wondering about is, the priorities and needs of different departments. And, I think that Public Works example is really interesting. When I look at this chart here that shows, the infrastructure upgrades and just looking at each department and the different uses, clearly Public Works is at the top of the list in terms of the vehicle fleet. So that seems to me like something that would be that's a huge seismic change. That there's just a lot to unpack and untangle there just with the public works part of it. But I guess my question is more related to public transit. I know we have a bus system in place. I think, do we have 4 electric bus? How many?
We currently have 4, and I believe we're on the path to get 6 more. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, this is maybe a larger scale conversation that I'm just curious about, but I know that we're on the path to adopting EVs in public transit, but I'm also just curious to what extent the city's explored other sustainable options outside of EVs for public transit. I mean, this is what we're talking about, a massive infrastructure investment that would have to occur, tens of millions of dollars. And so something like a light rail system, for instance, would also be like a massive infrastructure investment, but would potentially, in my mind, have certain benefits that might be, yeah, like an improvement even on EVs. Clearly, EVs are an improvement on internal combustion engines. But yeah, just like cold weather operation, for instance, is something that, yeah, batteries, their capacity depletes when they're in the cold, and, you know, Iowa's got very cold winters. So that's just something, it's not necessarily, I guess the question there is like, to what extent are individual departments exploring like their own specific needs within this study, as opposed to like a kind of larger one-size EV-fits-all approach?
I love that you brought this up, Michael, because you helped me remember the other thing I was going to say, which is, you know, there's a question of where we are in this process compared to other cities. And because of the work we're doing with transit, in our last conversation with ICF, we were talking about the next steps. And they said, you know, normally at this point, other cities hire us on to continue doing implementation work, to work with them. But you are actually so far ahead of what other cities are doing, you already have that in-house expertise and don't actually need us necessarily to do that implementation work side by side with you. So that just gives some context to where we're at. But then in response to your question about individual departments, I think a lot of this process actually was meeting with the individual departments multiple times and talking about what are you looking at, what are you interested in, what are the unique needs. And by and large, it was very much focused on fleet electrification and EVs, in part because we're a small enough city that for the most part, electric vehicles do meet our needs, you know, without that additional light rail component as an alternative, as an example. But I know that when we expand outward and look regionally, you know, discussions about what to do with the Crandeck rail, for example, there have been some very recent discussions about battery-powered trains versus light rail or overhead-powered electric trains. So outside of the city's individual needs, I think those conversations are happening. I will say, I think it predates your time on the commission. One of the things we had initially put in the RFP is we wanted to look at electrification and hydrogen. We had heard that hydrogen might be cost prohibitive, but we thought it'd be good to get some like really solid numbers on that. Ultimately, long story short, for budget reasons, we ended up constraining it just to EVs, but we worked with the university's engineering department and some engineering students to do some very rough estimates for hydrogen as an alternative. And boy, howdy, did they confirm that that would just be orders of magnitude more expensive than EVs, we're really grateful to get that information because it allows us to focus in then on electric vehicles specifically for this. And I would say then the final thought I had in response to your really great question, thank you for it, is part of the reason we're looking at fleet electrification specifically, and I think we alluded to this in the memo, is that, you know, we have a lot of discussions here as a commission about different transportation modes, right? And trying an all of the above strategy where we're really doing our best to support walkability in the city and bikeability. You know, there have been a lot of discussions in the last year about the 15-minute city. But when you get to the fleet, and particularly the heavy-duty applications, there really is no bike alternative for a refuse truck or a recycling truck or a snowplow. And so if we are serious about decarbonizing city operations, then we have to be looking at alternatives to fossil fuel uses for these larger vehicles. And that is really the heart. I would say there are two main drivers that pushed us to get this study done. One was understanding that we need to look for heavy-duty applications for which walking and biking are not going to get us there. And two, just understanding that we need to be thinking further ahead about the infrastructure and understanding the conversations that need to happen with the utilities and with our neighbors to make sure all that's in place to enable that transition. such a long-winded answer, but such a great question. Thank you.
No, thanks. I mean, the one thing I guess I wanted to just dovetail into that is, yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Like, you can't like have a fleet of like garbage workers or refuse workers, yeah, like on bicycles. That's not going to happen. And yeah, that makes sense, I think, to adopt EVs in cases like that. And yeah, like, I'm not pushing back per se against EVs in general, but I'm just curious about, like, are there just, like, in public transit, for instance, I think there's just opportunities for alternatives to EVs even that aren't just biking or walkability. Those are important, but even just other alternatives even to an electric fleet of buses. Yeah, certainly though, an EV, like heavy-duty application is, though there are problems with it, with like a plow truck or like a refuse truck, there might be issues that are run into with like an EV version of that. But yes, I would agree, it's definitely better than like a gas car version of it, so.
Sarah, one comment that I just wanted to make is when I was looking over this initially, it made me really excited thinking about the opportunities that Iowa City has to influence other, businesses and other organizations, not just other cities, but by doing the sorts of things that the city is doing right now, showing sort of a path forward for other people to emulate in their organizations and businesses. And, be coming across the different issues that we've come across to, that they came across in this study, to be able to show other people that these are the things to be thinking about. So, anyway, so I was happy to see that and thinking about, the future of, our general community and the sort of things that doing this provides to them.
This is Einan Lynch. I'm just curious what the next step is from here. Is this like something that's then going to go to council to sort of be figured into budgets, or specific sort of budget plans for the next year? Where are we at?
So the budget for next year has already been approved.
Right. Will it be included in the next
Future
budget
discussions of
cycle?
budget cycles.
Yeah. Are we at that point, or is it?
Realistically, probably not. We do have, I think for light-duty vehicles, we'll probably continue rolling forward in making some of those light-duty purchases. As we've discussed many times, we're entering some significant financial headwinds with the city that make it difficult to take on some of these added expenses. But we're fortunate in that we already have some portions of it baked in, right? So just to backtrack a little, the immediate next step is the county is now going to embark on its own fleet electrification study, in part because we've been in conversation with them throughout this process. And so we'll be sharing our study with them, and then they will embark on that process. And then we, as you noted in the memo, or I noted in the memo, we want to form a working group between the county, the city, the university, the school district, and the utilities serving us, so that we can all get on the same page, right? One of the pinch points, and when we may need to lean on your expertise on this, that we had referenced earlier, is you can't reserve capacity on increased substation capacity. So a thing that's a little different for the city adopting electric vehicles as opposed to you all as individuals or us as individuals is that if any of us go out and buy an EV, we can take it home, we can park it in our garage. We don't necessarily have to think about increasing the capacity of the transformer or the substation that serves our nation. That gets, neighborhood. That gets baked into the utility planning process. But for larger entities like the city and industrial entities, if you need more capacity that has to be added to a substation, you have to pay for that individually. And that's a bit of a fairness issue, so that let's imagine you have a big factory in town that needs a whole lot more electric capacity. the requirement is that they pay for that additional infrastructure upgrade so that residents aren't having to foot the bill for this industrial activity. It works the same for cities. You know, if we have to put a lot on, we have to pay for it. Now, we're not the only ones drawing on that capacity, right? So if we go and we pay for this substation increased capacity, and not that I think they would ever do this to us, but let's say a bus service that we're going to call Cambar. If Cambar were to be like, this is great, there's all this more great capacity, let's hurry up and buy a bunch of buses, and their buses come in before our buses do, and then when we get our buses, that extra capacity we just paid for has been used up, we would have to pay for that capacity again, right? And so before we start making any of these investments, we really need to have some of those baseline conversations with the surrounding entities to make sure we're doing it in a coordinated way and nobody is footing the bill for somebody else's activities inadvertently. Once those conversations have happened, then I think we can more confidently begin rolling the larger plan into the city budgeting process. But in the meantime, because we have already been having a lot of conversations about our transit facility, we won't have to wait for that portion of the plan to be incorporated into the budgeting process. It already is. And so we'll be moving forward with that in the near term, and we'll also be moving forward with some individual smaller pilot projects like the one that we've had going on with the police department, where we can buy 1 or 2 vehicles for them to experiment with and figure out how it works for that specific department before we start making those larger budget requests for the infrastructure to support the whole PD fleet going electric, for example. Did I capture that correctly, Wim?
You did.
Okay.
Sarah, not to be silly, but I recently was doing some training with some very aggressive Southern peace officers who were not shy about their attitudes. And among others, there were a number of anti-vaxxers in the group, which drove me crazy. But I brought up EVs, and one of them raised his hand in a not too polite way, indicated, I'll drive an EV when bank robbers are all driving EVs. That was his attitude. And so it's like competition. You know, I don't want the other side, whatever the other side is, to be able to perform better than I can because I'm being loyal to saving the globe with my EV. I'll save the globe, but I got to be competitive. And that's not just cops and robbers. That's kind of life.
If you want to hear something a little funny on that note, part of our project this year, we helped the police department acquire an electric bike for part of our bike patrol. And you know what Sam said earlier, that often when you get one vehicle in place, it immediately makes converts of folks who might otherwise have been reluctant. That e-bike is so effective. The officer who's been using it has been using it to pull over cars, which has changed a lot of minds about the power of electric vehicles, not just for, you know, the folks who might immediately be using them, but for the vehicles themselves. It's actually been one of our great success stories, and it has been driving the conversation about, well, what else can we do with electric vehicles for the city? So, and for the police department specifically. So that's been great.
You don't really hear about car chases too often here, so it doesn't, maybe that's not an issue.
Yeah.
for us,
EVs also have an incredible amount of torque. You know, if any of you have ever driven them, like, I think in a situation where you had an electric vehicle having to track down a bank robber, well, God forbid, you know, hopefully we'll never deal with this situation, but I actually think the EV would have the advantage, in all honesty.
Until they get beyond 125 miles and have to recharge. But then we're leaving our jurisdiction at that point.
Any other questions?
This might be completely undoable, but I don't know if the city ever works with corporations and public-private partnerships of sorts to solve problems, but I've heard that Amazon is now converting most of their fleet to electric, and Rivians are on their way to places. Now that we have a distribution center here, is it possible to work with them and maybe leverage, like bring the Rivians in? That'll lower our carbon offset, and also maybe we can leverage, infrastructure with them too.
Yeah, we do try to ping Amazon every so often to hear what their plans are. We haven't heard anything yet about the proposed date for electrification here in Iowa City, but we do know it's coming. Actually, Adamantine Spine has been in regular conversation with us about their interest in electrifying their fleet, which is super exciting. And we do hope, actually, to be able to partner with them. Particularly, you heard Sam talk about how the real pinch point here isn't like the light duty vehicles that we all drive or even the really heavy duty vehicles. It's those medium duty vehicles, the box trucks and the larger pickup trucks. And that's really the space that Adamantine is operating in. So we're very interested in working with them and trying to figure out some lessons learned that we could share with other entities, since they realistically will be early adopters for our community. Cool. Well, thank you all so much for your thoughtful questions and comments. This has been a lot of work. Danny, is there anything that you would have to add?
Just to your question, Angie, on other municipalities that have gone down this route, I'd encourage you to look into what Madison, Wisconsin has been doing. I think of the few cities that are ahead of us, they are ahead of us. I'm very impressed with what their fleet manager has been able to accomplish. And they're actually piloting an electric fire truck right now.
Yeah, and I also just wondered, like, in the world, too. Like, I would assume other countries maybe are, but, yeah. In the Midwest, it's great. I'll have to look into that.
Great. Well, if there's no further discussion, we'll move on to visioning indicators of success in the built environment. We'll discuss the metrics and frequency.
Yeah, this was a request from the previous meeting, and I know, Michael, you had some thoughts to share. So obviously, we've just got a little bit of time, but that's okay. Our intention today was just to get any notes that you all may have, make sure we're capturing them while it's still fresh in your minds, and then we'll continue to roll those into the efforts staff are making toward metrics recommendations. So, Michael, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Just to link this back, we had done mini-series of visioning what we think would be different in our community if we were successful with this climate action plan, and understanding that our main metric of greenhouse gas reduction is we're sort of like tapping out our ability to make drastic changes on that graph now that Mid-American is nearly done adding wind to the grid. We know that our efforts are going to make minuscule difference on that graph, and so what we need to think about, or what I think would be helpful for us to think about, is what are sort of other metrics that we can be looking at to know if our climate action plan is having an impact. So we did all this visioning, and we came up with different metrics, like how much people are biking, or how big our houses are, all these different things that might indicate that we are headed towards a more sustainable community. And so the homework from two meetings ago was for us to think about the frequency of reporting that we think would be useful as a body, and then also how might these kinds of reports be used. So from my point of view, I think a frequency of reporting, I think depending on what kinds of metrics we come up with, I would think quarterly or yearly. Any kind of strategic plan, I think it helps to look at on a quarterly basis and see this is what we expected to happen and this is what's actually happening. And then in terms of how might these reports be used, I would imagine we would use them to evaluate the success of our programs and policies. I think we would use them to help other departments and counselors think about what policy or budgetary changes need to be made, and decide on budget priorities. And I think we could use them to align all budget and departmental priorities to the climate action value in the Iowa City strategic plan. And then generally just weigh priorities and make trade-offs. And I'd be happy to say more about any one of those, but I'll stop there.
Could you repeat that fourth one, Michael?
Yeah, just generally weigh priorities and make trade-offs. Like, you know, I think we know any decision or priority means something else gets deprioritized, but I think having clear metrics that we're using about where we want to get to, then we could use those numbers to help us really understand what the trade-off in a particular decision is.
One question about metrics, would they be on an ongoing basis? So all you had to do was hit some buttons and you could give an instantaneous report out, or would we have to do some sort of assessment that would take a week gathering information relative to metrics?
I think that really depends on the metrics. Like we brainstormed a bunch of metrics here. My understanding is the staff is developing a proposal or something about what metrics we might use. So I think it really, you know, a metric like, obviously like the greenhouse gas metric, we can't just instantly know that. It takes time to compile.
When I think about this, I'm almost wondering if it would be worthwhile for a work group, honestly, because we have such a large plan, and I mean, there are so many different areas of the plan, and there are so many different metrics where it's like, it might be readily available, or it might be, you know, a survey that needs to be done to figure out, or like just kind of identifying, you know, do we need some primary data, do we need some secondary data to see those measurements, and then we could decide like how often we could report. You know, maybe it is every year because we only get those numbers every year. So it's almost like such a case by case basis of that. I would love to just sit down and look at it more in depth, but I don't know if staff wise, like if that's kind of what your approach is too, or.
It certainly could be. I think one thought we've had is, it's so funny, we took up this topic and then it got taken up by the city writ large, right? And so there's this new process that we're trying to like not lose what we've already discussed, but fold it into that. I think what might work is to give staff, because we're still getting our arms around this new approach, to give us a chance to say, here's what we think is going to fit with that based with what seems to be rising to the surface, and bring you a memo about it as we had initially proposed. And then maybe a working group would like to take up that memo and review it and make your own recommendations, and then we could send both memos to the city council, or we could combine them in some way. But I think it might be helpful if you're welcome to approach it any way you'd like. If you'd like, want to form a working group at the next meeting, we can do that. If you're comfortable waiting to get that initial staff assessment and then form a working group, we can take that approach as well. If somebody has a third idea, feel free to lay it out. I think basically we're sort of in uncharted territory. So traditionally, these kinds of metrics are usually proposed by staff. They don't often come from commissions or boards for the city. So that means we kind of get to invent how we want to do it as we go.
This fits into a classic polarity that we have to really think about, and that's somebody on high saying, or one of us, one of the workers, anyone involved, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to do the work to reduce greenhouse emissions, or do you want me to submit reports? And the answer is yes. And it can't be, it's got to work together. And there's a tendency to let's stop work and gather all the information and write the report. Okay, now we got to go back to work. Now let's, and it's got to coexist. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the challenge with metrics.
I would say one other challenge is, we have programs that we spool up and spool down, right? And to be able to effectively capture the value of those, fitting it into this larger rubric, I think is going to take some thoughtful deliberation. I'll just use as an example the insulation grant program, right, which is very important to the work that we do. We feel like demonstrating the value of that is something that we've really worked very hard on. Is that problem going to continue 5 years from now? Maybe not. Maybe it gets folded into other energy efficiency programs. So how do we strike the balance between showing some sort of metrics of success with the insulation grant program, but maybe fitting it into larger metrics about energy efficiency that could incorporate other programs that would have a similar intent, right? I think those are all things that we're thinking about.
Maybe I can give an example. Like I'm trying to remember what Tyler told us last meeting, but maybe it's a goal of 30% or 40% canopy cover.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is an example of like a large metric that we think would move the needle towards what we want. We want to see like a reduction in heat islands. We know there's like carbon capture in trees. There's all these good benefits of trees. We know they're important, and that's a big high-level metric that we can look at over years and see, like, are we getting to where we want it to be? So not necessarily like specific program metrics that might wind down over the years, but what are those bigger picture things? Like we need more, we know we have a housing shortage, we're going to need more houses, but we also need to not just keep sprawling indefinitely. So
Yeah.
is there a metric we could have about that we could see like, okay, we're moving in the right directions, our policies, our programs are moving in the right direction, and we're seeing the more kind of dense development that we need,
Yeah.
as an example.
I mean, I think collecting data helps us make smarter decisions. Yeah, so we want to be able to do that. Yeah. So deciding what we want to collect data on, I guess, is, yeah.
And knowing that it can't be everything.
Yeah.
I would happily sit on a working group to think about this.
Great.
Yeah, hearing your feedback, it sounds like staff will give a memo to the commission and then see from there if a working group is.
Yeah, so our plan at the moment, with apologies, I don't know exactly when it will be, though we're hoping sometime in the next couple meetings. We'd like to come back with a memo that looks at the metrics that were proposed previously, as well as some that we have thought of in our discussions as part of the larger conversation among city departments. And yeah, we can take the conversation from there.
Great, thank you. Well, we're on the recap. We will confirm the next meeting time and location. Time is Monday, July 1st, 3:30 to 5, here in Emma J. Habit Hall. Because that's so close to the holiday, we'll just see who's available to come, I suppose. So no one take vacation, please.
And if you do, please let us know.
Yeah, actionable items for commission, or none, but for staff,
We'll be working on that memo.
yes. All right, so motion to adjourn.
Silman motions to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, Fraser, a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
All opposed? Nope, okay.